Welcome, folks, to the 27th Annual Issues and Answers Forum. My name is Ron Milhorn. I'm the News Director for KMTS Radio. This event is brought to you by Glenwood Springs Chamber Resort Association, Glenwood Springs Post-Independent, KMTS, Cable Channel 10, and local State Farm Insurance agents Jeff Leonard and Dee McCown. A special thank you to the City of Glenwood Springs for allowing us to broadcast live from City Hall. The event is being broadcast live on Cable Channel 10. It will be rebroadcast on October 16th, tonight at 8 o'clock, October 19th, 20th, 24th, and 25th at 7 a.m., noon, 7 p.m., and midnight on Cable Channel 10. A video of this forum will also be available at glenwoodchamber.com. Today's questions for issue representatives, Amendment 66 and ballot issue 2A and 5A, are a combination of questions from the Glenwood Springs Post-Independent, questions collected in advance at glenwoodchamber.com, and questions from the audience. If you have questions you would like to ask regarding these topics, please write them down on one of the green cards provided on the table outside and bring them up to the question box in the front row. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible within the time restrictions. Now, as the moderator, I'll ask the questions of the issue representatives. Representatives for Amendment 66 will deliver a 2-minute opening statement. Those for ballot issues 5A and 2A will deliver a 5-minute overview. There will be time limits of 1 minute assigned for answering questions. Each representative will be allowed a 1-minute closing statement. 5-minute statements will be read on behalf of the committees favoring and opposing Proposition AA. Since only one candidate is present for the CMC Board of Trustees District 3 race, there will not be a debate. Jay Rickster will give a 5-minute statement, and a 5-minute statement will be read on behalf of Mary Ellen Denemy. Tonight's timer will be Scott Anderson. He will hold up a card reminding tonight's speakers that they will have 30 seconds left to answer a question, and also let them know when their time is up. The order for tonight: Proposition AA, Colorado Mountain College Board of Trustee candidates, ballot issues 5A and 2A. We'll take a break and then have a debate on Amendment 66. Some statements have been prepared. As the moderator, I will be reading the statements on behalf of the Committee for Responsible Regulation and No Overtaxation. This is Proposition AA. In favor. This statement is being read on behalf of the Committee for Responsible Regulation, the committee in favor of Proposition AA. Colorado voters, with the passage of Amendment 64, legalized the possession and sale of marijuana for individuals 21 and older in Colorado, while requiring the state to create a regulatory structure for the retail marijuana industry. Proposition AA is the measure that addresses the excise tax requirements of Amendment 64 for public school construction and establishes an additional sales tax to provide the resources for responsible regulation and enforcement of the retail marijuana industry. The two key provisions detailed by Proposition AA are: 1, a 15% excise tax on the average wholesale price of retail marijuana, with the proceeds going to fund public school construction, and 2, a 10% sales tax on retail marijuana, with 15% of that amount being directed back to the counties and cities allowing retail marijuana sales. Proposition AA will ensure that the emerging retail marijuana industry is regulated strictly and responsibly. It will finish the job of and fulfill the promise made by Amendment 64 to direct tens of millions of dollars annually to Colorado public school construction. As written by the Denver Post editorial board, the two statewide taxes of Proposition AA are, quote, necessary companions to the measure that voters supported in 2012, end quote. The excise tax will generate funding for public school construction, with the first $40 million raised each year allocated for the Building Excellent Schools Today BEST program, renewing and renovating old facilities, addressing air quality issues, and overcrowding in Colorado schools. Current estimates project that the passage of Proposition AA will generate $27.5 million in excise tax revenue annually for the BEST program. Sales tax revenue from Proposition AA will fund regulatory activities to test, track, label, and process the cultivation and sale of retail marijuana products. The proceeds from the 10% sales tax will be applied to measures preventing the diversion of Colorado retail marijuana out of state and from reaching individuals under the age of 21. The revenue will also be used to fund costs associated with marijuana education, mental health programs, and public safety projects. With the federal government watching and evaluating the implementation of a regulatory scheme for retail marijuana in Colorado, we cannot afford to fail in our enforcement efforts. We must pass Proposition AA to ensure adequate funding for this emerging industry and for public school construction. No on Proposition AA. This statement is being read on behalf of No Overtaxation, the committee proposed to Proposition AA. Dear Glenwood Springs community members, due to limited campaign resources, we are not able to attend this evening's Issues and Answers Forum to discuss our opposition to Proposition AA. On November 5th, people will be asked to vote for Proposition AA, which imposes a 15% excise tax on wholesale marijuana transfers and an additional 15% special marijuana sales tax. 10% of the sales tax will be set, and the additional 5% can be raised or lowered by the General Assembly without voters' consent. All of these taxes will be on top of existing state and local taxes. We believe that this is excessive. We also believe that the additional 5% that can be arbitrarily raised or lowered violates the spirit of the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, also known as the Tabor Act, which gives voters the right to vote on all proposed taxes. Marijuana legalization is being argued as a way to bring in tax revenue for local and federal governments and as a way to raise money for schools. The debate rarely focuses on the boon economy that marijuana has the potential to be. This is due to the fear of scaring away people who are against marijuana and are afraid of legalization, as well as losing support of local and federal governments. The reality is that many economists predict marijuana to be one of the industries to pull us out of this terrible economic recession. No on Proposition AA fears that overtaxation in the beginning will stifle this potential economic growth. All of the studies used to determine marijuana revenue admit that it is impossible to know exactly how many marijuana users there are, which makes it impossible to accurately predict true economic growth. Considering that marijuana is already a multi-billion-dollar black market industry, with many people avoiding admitting to using marijuana for various reasons, it is safe to assume that the potential for economic growth in Colorado is much more than predicted. Between tourism and marijuana enthusiasts throughout the state, there will be plenty of revenue to pay for schools and regulation enforcement. Worst case scenario, if sales are not enough to cover regulation enforcement, it is much easier to vote for a new tax than it will be to undo a measure baked into constitutional law. No on Proposition AA is not anti-tax and anti-regulation. We are for reasonable, responsible, and fair taxes and regulations, as all citizens should be. Supporters of Proposition AA point to the recent audit failure of the Medical Marijuana Enforcement Division as an example of why we need to give them more money. They argue that Colorado's marijuana enforcement divisions should be flush with money in order to avoid federal intervention. There is very little citizen oversight of how the MMED spends money, which they were recently under fire for having more SUVs and employees, a clear example of irresponsibly managing funds. They could have used that money to run an efficient operation. In corporate America, people are fired for inefficiency and waste, not given raises. It was argued during the push for Amendment 64 that law enforcement costs will be reduced because of legalization, so cities and states need to balance their budgets first before being given the largest tax in Colorado history. To address the issue of federal intervention, the DEA and Department of Justice have billions of dollars in taxpayer revenue already in their budgets to enforce borders and keep track of drug cartels. The taxes proposed by Proposition AA are not the same taxes that Coloradans voted for when they voted for Amendment 64 to legalize marijuana. Amendment 64 called for the enactment of an excise tax, but not for special marijuana sales taxes. This is a money grab that can do more harm than good. To use old cliches, Proposition AA is a penny-wise and pound-foolish measure that cuts the nose to spite the face. It is an overreactive, knee-jerk reaction for legitimacy in a new industry that could be smothered before it has a chance to catch fire. We are asking voters to vote no on Proposition AA and demand that the General Assembly come back to voters with more reasonable marijuana taxes on separate measures.